How do pathogens get into fruit and veg? And why are melons so risky? We don't usually think of fruit as risky from a food safety perspective, but cantaloupes and peaches have both been involved in deadly recalls this year. There have been at least 2 deaths from Salmonella infections linked to whole cantaloupes and at least 1 death from listeriosis linked to whole peaches in the past few months. It's not just fruit. Raw sprouts and leafy greens are famously risky foods, but other veg can also cause outbreaks of illness, like onions, which sickened 2,546 people in 13 Salmonella outbreaks in the USA in the 10 years to 2021. In the US, 16% of outbreaks between 2010 and 2013 were attributed to fruits and vegetables. So how do bacterial pathogens like Salmonella, Listeria and E. coli end up in whole fruits and vegetables like cantaloupes, peaches and onions? Turns out there are a lot of contamination routes. Perhaps the most famous whole fruit outbreak is one which was ultimately traced back to a contaminated fruit washing machine in a cantaloupe packing house owned by Jensen Farms in 2011. A total of 33 deaths and 1 miscarriage from listeriosis were linked to cantaloupes processed on the farm. Another 10 people who were infected with Listeria subtypes linked to the outbreak also died, but their deaths were not attributed to listeriosis. In the Jensen Farms case, investigators concluded that the cantaloupes became contaminated with Listeria while being handled after harvesting. Food microbiologists call this post-harvest contamination. Fruit and veg can also be contaminated before harvest, which is pre-harvest contamination. Pre-harvest contamination can occur on the surface of fruits and vegetables from soil, irrigation water, and animal feces. But contaminants don't always remain on the surface of produce. Bacterial pathogens can also get inside food plants in a process called colonization. Seeds, water, animal feces, birds, and insects can all become sources of contamination that ultimately leads to colonization with pathogens. Soil contamination can take the form of dust and dirt getting onto plant surfaces. The dust storm in Australia is said to have contributed to the contamination of rock melons, cantaloupe, with Listeria in 2018, while a rare dust storm in the United Kingdom contributed to salad leaves being contaminated with pathogenic E. coli from dust carried from a nearby animal farm in 2022. Human pathogens can survive in soils for long periods. For example, Salmonella typhimurium persists for more than 7 months in soil and Listeria for almost a year. Contaminated seeds are another potential source of pre-harvest pathogens in fruit and veg. In the lab, seeds of lettuce, cress, alfalfa and tomato which have been artificially contaminated or inoculated with bacteria can grow into plants that have pathogens inside their roots, stems and leaves. Irrigation water and floodwater can also deliver pathogens into and onto food plants. Water sources near cattle farms seem particularly risky, and US authorities have recommended buffer zones between leafy green growing areas and concentrated animal feeding operations, or feedlots, to prevent surface water and dust contaminated with animal feces from getting onto leafy greens. In 2005, a pond contaminated with Salmonella and used to irrigate tomatoes caused an outbreak in romaine lettuce in the US, and watercress in the UK have also been linked to outbreaks caused by water sources contaminated by nearby cattle farms. Wild animal feces are also a source of contamination of fruit and veg. Outbreaks have been caused by pathogenic E. coli from strawberries contaminated with deer feces and spinach contaminated with feral swine feces. Improperly composted manure of domestic animals has caused foodborne illness outbreaks in lettuce and spinach. Bacteria get inside plants by first attaching to the surfaces of the plants, where they may multiply to form aggregates, sometimes making use of biofilms, from where they grow through open pores on the plant's surface to get inside the plant. Once inside the plant, pathogens can't be easily removed by washing. Notably, washing with plain water doesn't remove all bacterial pathogens from leafy greens. Preventing pre-harvest contamination is a challenge. Using clean seeds, Irrigating with clean water and keeping large animals off fruit and veg crops are key controls which can be relatively simple to implement for some farms. However, other controls are extremely difficult, and these include controls to prevent dust, floodwaters, and small wild animals like rodents from coming into contact with produce while it's growing. Probably the most important preventive measure for pre-harvest contamination of fruit and veg crops is to physically separate them from areas where there are animal farming operations, especially concentrated feeding operations, which are a source of concentrated bacterial pathogens, contaminated water, and dust. Post-harvest contamination of fruit and vegetables is more preventable than pre-harvest contamination. Post-harvest operations include the packing, washing, storage, and preparation of fruit and veg. Good manufacturing processes, GMP, and HACCP-based food safety management systems can be used to identify hazards and reduce food safety risks. Key controls include monitoring of wash water, cleaning of process equipment, control of storage temperatures, and personnel hygiene protocols. Interestingly, researchers have shown that areas of damage on the leaves of leafy greens, which have been bruised during harvest, can support higher numbers of pathogens and other bacteria, and that mechanically damaged leaves allow the invasion of pathogens into the tissue of the leaves. Therefore, reducing damage to edible leaves could help reduce pathogen loads. Post-harvest wash water contains a sanitizing agent to remove some pathogens. However, the concentration of sanitizer must be carefully controlled. Post-harvest wash water can spread pathogens from contaminated leaves to non-contaminated leaves, and contaminated wash water has led to an outbreak of Salmonella from melons. Post-harvest contact surfaces can become a source of contamination for fruit and veg as well. For example, ready-to-eat salad leaves became contaminated with Listeria monocytogenes during contact with a conveyor belt, which could not be properly cleaned due to its design, leading to an outbreak which sickened 32 people in Switzerland in 2013 and 2014. Similarly, in 2021, Dole's food safety team traced the source of Listeria contamination in a lettuce-linked outbreak to a harvester which had uncleanable areas. And you can read the fascinating story of Dole's investigation in issue 91. Why melons? When fruit is cut, bacteria on the surface can be transferred into the flesh, carried by the knife. Cut melons seem to be particularly at risk, being implicated in foodborne illness outbreaks more often than other types of fruit. One reason that's given to explain this phenomenon is that the flesh of melons and watermelons has relatively low acidity compared to other fruits, with a pH of about 6. Other commentators report that the rough, porous surfaces of cantaloupe skin makes it difficult to sanitize during post-harvest washing, which could increase the likelihood of pathogens getting into the flesh when the fruit is cut. Chlorinated washing of whole cantaloupes doesn't completely remove Enterococci bacteria. A final factor which makes melons risky is they're often grown in contact with the ground. Researchers found melon production soils had high levels of coliforms and Enterococci bacteria in the furrows of fields which were flood irrigated. Takeaways for food professionals and consumers. Raw fruit and vegetables can be contaminated with human pathogens during pre-harvest and post-harvest operations. For fruit and veg that will be eaten raw, the contamination can lead to deadly outbreaks. The prevention of contamination relies on the actions of growers, packing houses, and post-harvest operators. Washing fruit and vegetables doesn't remove all pathogens. Fruit and vegetables grown in high-risk areas, including areas near animal feedlots or where wastewater or wild animals could contaminate the crops, should be cooked prior to eating. In short, pathogens such as Salmonella, E. coli, and Listeria can be present on the surface of fruit and vegetables and can also get inside some plant foods. Pre-harvest contamination occurs while the food plant is growing. Bacteria can get inside plant foods by first attaching to plant surfaces, then multiplying, sometimes in biofilms, then growing through the pores of the plant to its interior. Post-harvest contamination occurs during washing, packing, storage, and handling. Melons are grown close to the ground, have low pH flesh and rough porous skin, which could contribute to the relatively high number of fruit outbreaks linked to melons. And as always, there is a full list of sources in the email and the post.